Multimedia Publishing Incorporated, Denver, Colorado, presents the Get Acquainted series, introducing authors and places in American literature. This unit, written by Paul Friesen, introduces William Bradford and the Plymouth Colony, and Roger Williams and the Providence Settlement. In this unit, you will learn who William Bradford was, how his clear and perceptive writings give us an accurate account of the founding of Plymouth, and why the Pilgrims under his leadership came to America. You will also learn who Roger Williams was, and how the Providence, Rhode Island area became a refuge for free thinkers in religious and social beliefs. Following the Reformation in continental Europe, continued discontent with the established church, this time in England, drove a group of separatists to self-exile in Holland. After 12 years of attempted assimilation with Dutch culture and business, yet with attempted separation from Dutch religion and moral corruptness, they looked for a new country where they could propagate their own form of religion and establish a permanent home for their descendants. Financed by speculators in England, 46 men, women, and children from the church in Leiden, Holland, together with about 95 strangers from England, embarked from Plymouth, England, for the north parts of Virginia, aboard the Mayflower on September 16, 1620. The Mayflower, under the command of Captain Christopher Jones, was a small cargo ship, old and battered, and unequipped for passenger service. A second ship, the Speedwell, was also secured for the trip. After 2 starts into the Atlantic, the second time 300 miles out to sea, the Speedwell proved too full of leaks and had to return and be abandoned at Plymouth. It was not difficult to find about 40 passengers who would choose to stay in England, so that the remaining 102 could continue on the Mayflower. Cramped quarters, seasickness, unpalatable sea rations, and obnoxious sailors made the 65-day voyage exceedingly difficult and intolerable for the pious, Sabbath-keeping passengers. They expected hardships, but the torturous voyage exceeded their worst expectations, especially when they were confined to their quarters below deck for 3 weeks while a fierce Atlantic storm battered the ship unmercifully. Through the inspiring leadership and comforting words of William Brewster, Miles Standish, and especially William Bradford, all the passengers except one, who died of scurvy, survived to hear the welcome cry from the lookout, "Land! Land ho!" The storm had driven the ship off course to the north, so instead of northern Virginia, the tip of Cape Cod appeared. Rounding the cape, the ship anchored near the shore. After giving God thanks for the safe journey, the settlers began exploring both by land on foot and along the shore by shallop, a small sailboat. After a month of exploring and searching, the men found a suitable place. Not having a charter for this area, they were responsible for their own governing system. Accordingly, they drew up an agreement, or compact, which all of the men signed. The compact, signed in the cabin of the Mayflower, obligated the signers to solemnly and mutually, in the presence of God and one of another, covenant and combine ourselves together into a civil body politic, for our better ordering and preservation and furtherance of the ends aforesaid. With this agreement signed, assuring peace between a growing faction separating the Pilgrims and the strangers, the Mayflower sailed across the bay and dropped anchor off the shores of Plymouth, Massachusetts, where a large rock formed an unforgettable landmark. Designated as Plymouth Rock, This large rock on the shores of Plymouth marks the landing place of the Pilgrims in their new home on December 15, 1620. The rock offered a silent, unhospitable welcome to the weary settlers of this cold and bleak sandy shore. Bradford wrote, "Being thus past the vast ocean, they had now no friends to welcome them, nor ends to entertain or refresh their weather-beaten bodies, no houses, or much less towns, to repair to seek for succor." The rock became a symbol of the steadfast courage and endurance of these settlers. Although the Mayflower stayed in the harbor, and some passengers did not leave it to go ashore until March of 1621, the beginnings of a settlement and village quickly got underway. Unskilled in construction and other manual labor, the colonists set to work, first building a common house to hold supplies from the ship and to provide shelter, and then constructing houses for the settlers. All construction required hand labor, from the sawing of the timber to the notching, lifting, fitting of the framework. Their houses resembled the thatched roof dwellings in their native England, but progress in building proceeded slowly and was almost halted because of the cold weather and the general sickness which began in January to claim one life after another. So many were ill that often there were only 6 or 7 well enough to take care of the rest. The dead were buried on Cole's Hill. Extreme cold and spoiled food were the chief causes of the catastrophe. Bradford recorded that in 2 or 3 months' time, half of their company died, being infected with the scurvy and other diseases. So as there died sometimes 2 or 3 of a day, that of 100 and odd persons, scarce 50 remained. A large monument, or sarcophagus, now marks the site and contains some of the bones of those buried on Cole's Hill. At the time of the burial, the grave sites were leveled and corn was planted so that the Indians could not notice the rapidly diminishing military strength of the white settlers. Although the exploration parties had been attacked on Cape Cod, the settlers' fear of the Indians was largely unfounded. They soon made a peace treaty with Massasoit, the great sachem of the Wampanoags, who became a protector and preserver of the Pilgrims. Massasoit was introduced to the settlers by Squanto, who in turn had been brought to the settlement by Samoset, an Indian who had been sent out by the Council for New England to explore the coast with a Captain Dermer from England. To a large extent, the Pilgrims owed their survival to these 3 Indians. Massasoit not only wished to remain at peace with the white settlers, but he hoped to gain their aid in the event his tribe was attacked by the restless Narragansetts. A peace treaty was written and signed, pledging peace between the Wampanoags and the Plymouth colony, and promising mutual aid in case of outside attack. With the peace treaty signed, a treaty which remained unbroken for 50 years, the colonists could proceed to expand their settlement and live in relative peace. Springtime in 1621 brought warm weather, health, and renewed hope. Once again, they began building and also planted gardens in their new village. The village consisted of a row of houses on either side of a main street. At the village square stood a stockade, and in the distance the Pilgrims could see the ocean which they had crossed and which separated them from home and loved ones. It was a lonely place, but Bradford wrote, "It was a place fit for situation. At least it was the best they could find, and the season and their present necessity made them glad to accept of it." Of necessity, for protection and sharing of food and supplies, the colonists followed a communal system in building, farming, and household work. As more houses were built, the families were assigned to individual houses. The houses were built well of sawed timbers, mud-daubed, with thatched roofs, a kitchen and bedroom on the main floor, and extra sleeping quarters on a second floor. The houses were heated by open fireplaces, and all cooking was done over the open hearth. These primitive conditions combined to make meal preparation time-consuming and a drudgery for the women. The men hunted, fished, and raised domestic crops, and they chopped down trees for firewood in the nearby woods. Sufficient cooking utensils and storage barrels had been brought over from England. Initially, each person was allotted 1 acre of ground, and all work was done on an equal basis in communal fashion. Discontent among the settlers with this system led William Bradford, now governor of the colony, to abandon it and to put each family in charge of its own household work, crop planting and harvesting, and raising of farm animals, which soon filled the pastures and stock pens. The results were dramatic. General morale improved, but more importantly, corn yields increased to a surplus, and gardens produced an abundance of fruits and vegetables. Credit for the high corn yields was given to Squanto, who showed the colonists how to plant corn and fertilize each hill with a dead fish. Still fearful of Indian attacks and needing a general meeting place, the settlers constructed a combination fort meeting house in 1622 on top of the hill adjacent to their village. An opening on each side of the upper part revealed the barrel of a cannon, protecting the village from attacks on 3 land sides and the sea. Sturdily built of massive timbers, with an entrance inside the stockade fence, the fort offered a great sense of safety and security from Indian attacks. An inside stairway provided enclosed access to the upper fort, giving the colonists a quick and safe means of reaching their cannon. They also had muskets, which would shoot any kind of ammunition which could be crammed down the barrel. The large cannon had a short range and very little accuracy, but they made a tremendous noise, which scared off the Indians rather than harm them in the very few occasions when they were used. The Pilgrims were primarily a religious people, eager to pursue their own form of worship and to preserve it for their children. Here within secure walls, they met to sing and pray and to listen to lengthy sermons. According to their traditionally conservative ways, the men sat on one side and the women on the other. Their minister was William Brewster, about whom Bradford observed, "In teaching he was very stirring, and moving the affections, also very plain and distinct in what he taught, by which means he became the more profitable to the hearers." The first meeting house was plain and crude, but its sturdy construction symbolized the fortitude of these people who stayed in New England to form a permanent settlement. When the Mayflower returned to England, not one settler chose to return to his old home. Their new home fulfilled their wishes for personal and religious freedom, and they were thankful for this opportunity to preserve their distinctions by settling a new land. They were also thankful for material provisions. The worship of God and their gratefulness to Him for providing their needs took visible form as they prepared a large feast following their first harvest and invited Massasoit to attend. Massasoit came, bringing 90 hungry fellow Indians, but they and the settlers hunted and killed enough turkeys and deer and caught enough fish and eels for a 3-day Thanksgiving feast. Largely through the inspirational leadership of William Bradford, who lies buried on the hill where the original fort stood, the colonists banded together and withstood the hardships that had driven earlier settlers back to England. Under this stone rest the ashes of William Bradford, a zealous Puritan and a sincere Christian. He was governor of Plymouth from 1621 to 1657, the year he died, aged 69, except 5 years which he declined. His book of Plymouth Plantation presents a definitive view of the settlement of Plymouth, Massachusetts. Today, the Pilgrims have become an almost legendary group. Monuments and museums hail their achievements. In Plymouth, the Forefathers Monument rises in honor of their dedication to the causes for which they settled a new country. The monument symbolizes the conquering spirit of a small band who were undaunted in their fight for survival. It presents the four major causes for which they left their homeland to seek a new and better land. Sickened with the immorality prevalent in England and Holland, they sought a land where they could establish a colony based on biblical morality. Inhumane laws and injustice had prevented fair trials and lawful proceedings. Here in America, they could establish a colony based on fair and equitable laws. Education in the old country was almost non-existent for the poor and underprivileged. Here they could establish a system of free and equal education. Finally, oppressive religious intolerance which they had experienced in England drove them first to Holland and then to America. Here they could establish civil and religious liberty. The desire of the Pilgrims to retain unity and harmony with all settlers is evident in their acceptance of the strangers aboard the Mayflower. Later, as more intolerant Puritans arrived, persecution of dissenters began in the Massachusetts Bay Area. Freedom to worship and believe according to individual interpretation and conscience was forbidden by stern, dogmatic Puritans such as John Winthrop and Cotton Mather. Among the later settlers who were eventually banished from Massachusetts Bay were Anne Hutchinson and Roger Williams. Williams was at first welcomed in Plymouth. Bradford recorded that after some time he was admitted a member of the church, and his teaching well approved, for the benefits whereof I still bless God, and am thankful to him, even for his, William's, sharpest admonitions and reproofs, so far as they agreed with truth. Bradford continued, he this year began to fall into some strange opinions, and from opinion to practice, which caused some controversy between the church and him, and in the end some discontent on his part, by occasion whereof he left them something abruptly. Not desiring to challenge the teachings of the Puritan doctrines, Roger Williams left Massachusetts Bay for a more tolerant settlement in Rhode Island, where the people were more receptive to his teachings and beliefs. He founded the city of Providence and journeyed twice to England to get a charter for this new colony, which became a home for free thinkers. As a challenge to the rigidity of intolerant religions, Williams published a document entitled The Bloody Tenant of Persecution, for Cause of Conscience Discussed, a plea for individual rights and beliefs based on one's conscience. Williams' bold move and uncompromising faith set the stage for coming generations of immigrants seeking freedom and justice, and the right to practice religious beliefs according to individual interpretation. The massive marble tombstone erected in his honor in the Roger Williams Park in Providence, Rhode Island, commemorates the life of one who believed in complete religious freedom. Both the Pilgrims, under the leadership of Brewster and Bradford, and the Freethinkers, led by Roger Williams and Anne Hutchinson, established a new society in a new world in the 17th century. Through the writings of Bradford, Williams, and others of their contemporaries, succeeding generations have enjoyed a complete and accurate history of the beginnings of the United States of America.